Hey everybody, welcome to episode 43 of the Hey Everybody podcast. You can tell that's where you are because I just said, hey everybody, and I'm on this couch, and I'm holding a guitar. I've been thinking about changing things up a little bit. Like I said, we're on episode 43. If we see an episode 50, I could see changing things in some way. Maybe the setting or the structure or just abandoning structure altogether. That'd be fun. I've been thinking about maybe not playing a song every week just because I have to shoot the podcast, but rather like if the spirit moves, I'll play a song, and if not, I won't. After today, I will have played you 43 songs. I have more, but I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to start changing things up a little bit. And I instinctually push back against routine in some ways. In other ways, I desperately need my routine. And if it gets messed with, I get cranky. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. I think initially the idea of playing a song every week, I love playing songs for people. It's mostly what I do. But I think initially it found its way onto the podcast as kind of an insecurity on two levels, if we're being super honest. The first was that I want to be seen as a musician. You know, I want to be a husband and a dad, but people that see me, I want them to see, oh, he's a musician, he's a writer, he's a singer of songs. And I was concerned that if I started doing a podcast, people might see me as a guy who does a podcast and not a singer or a songwriter or a musician. So I was like, well, I'll just do a song every week on the podcast. As a funny side note, to see just how deep this particular strain of my neuroses goes. Some of you may remember there was a time where Christopher Gold, had coffee at the merch table that you could buy. A friend of mine, he became a friend of mine, he reached out and he said, hey, I'm a coffee roaster here in town, and if you ever think you might want like a signature coffee, let me know. And of course, I wanted to do that real bad. So we did that, and for maybe a year or less, we had coffee for sale, like bags of coffee at the merch table, and it was very cool. And I had a nightmare that the coffee sold so well that I gradually just became a traveling coffee salesman. And nobody wanted to hear my songs anymore, and it was terrible. And I woke up genuinely like shaken up about it. So that's how much I think about, well, if I do this thing and it goes well, but it's not musical, I'm not who I want to be anymore. And then, of course, the other reason I do a song every week is to give me an excuse to hold this guitar, because I feel more comfortable behind a guitar. I have been on stages before just talking, or occasionally we'll have a friend come up on stage and play my guitar part for a song, so I'll just be singing. But for the most part, my comfort level and maybe even my confidence shoots way up when I have a guitar in my hand. So maybe that's something we should get away from in the future, you know? We'll push into that discomfort and see what happens. But for now, it is now, and I have the guitar, and I have a fun idea for what to play you later. But in the meantime, let's talk about last week. Last week, I released a live record. It's a strange live record because it's old. I have this record called Whichever Way Home, which is a very special one to me personally. Just everything about it, the way it was made, the time it was made, the relationships in the band at the time, the shows we played after the record came out, the artwork, the collection of songs, obviously, and the style of what we were doing. I just love it to this day. I'm very I feel very affectionate towards that record, which is maybe a weird way to put it, but it's the way to put it. And that record is going to be 5 years old in a couple weeks. And I wanted to do something, and I've been thinking about it for a couple years, that, because you get reminded that, like, oh, this record's 5 years old, and then this record's 5 years old, and you don't care because you're glad those records are in the past. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, this record that I still quite like and feel really good about is going to have a significant anniversary. We should do something. And I thought for a long time, like, maybe we'll do a live show, and then COVID said we couldn't do a live show, and then I thought a variety of things, and eventually I remembered that when we released the record, we did so by playing it live in its entirety in the studio in which we made the record for a crowd of people. And that was recorded as well. So I tracked those files down and got a hold of them and had this live record, this studio quality live record that I had forgotten all about, that all of a sudden I'm very excited about releasing for the anniversary of this record. And listening back to it was really cool, because the band in every conceivable way has changed a lot since then. We have 2 new guys. There have been interim guys leading up to the 2 new guys. The way the band functions is different. The way I approach it is different. The sound is quite different. Everything about it has changed. And it was nice to revisit, because in this job or career or whatever, and even in this life, you don't get a ton of opportunity to stop and look back on something. And when you do, you don't often have a recording of the thing you're looking back on, you know? So listening back to this record in putting it together, it was fun. It was fun to think about those times and those guys and these songs and that kind of thing. And it also made me feel really good about where things are now and where they could go in the future. And it's nice to look back on something that doesn't really exist anymore and feel good about it, which is not always one of the options, you know? Especially for me, being in a band is hard for me, because I don't think I've ever been in a band with people that had the exact same motivations or goals or intentions or anything like that. I love everybody that's ever been in my band, and we've gotten along really well, and they've contributed a lot to the music, and they were all real quality dudes and quality musicians. But I don't think I've ever been in a band with someone who has looked at this batch of songs and said, like, yes, I think I will dedicate my life to this music and taking it wherever I can take it, and that kind of thing. So adjusting to that and finding the good in that has taken me all the way into my, I guess we're calling them late 30s now. And it created some friction sometimes, because maybe my expectations were unrealistic, or maybe people said they were up for stuff that they weren't up for, and then that kind of came around to bite us eventually. And it was just nice to feel confident about where things are now, and to look back and feel good about where they were, and not worry about feeling anything else. So that felt really good. And people seem to like the live record, and I'll drop a link for it. It's a real fun listen. It's a live show, so it's very off the cuff, and you get some humor and some mistakes and some energy and all kinds of stuff. And I'm really glad it's out there. I'm glad it's documented, and I'm glad people can hear it. Beyond that, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of being and becoming. So first I was listening to this podcast with a musician I like, and he was talking to this guy, and they were talking about this idea of being and becoming personally, and how they were talking about it through the lens of travel. And there's this very American idea of becoming something. What are you going to become? What are you going to do that's going to define you or give you purpose or meaning or whatever? But they were saying in other countries it's much more about just being who you are, and not being in such a hurry to, amass a catalog or a collection of accomplishments or stuff, you know. And I quite like the idea of like, yeah, being seems like the thing. Then I was reading this book called The Order of Time by a physicist named Carlo Rovelli. It's my second time through the book. The first time was harder because I was sort of obsessed with understanding it. And I wasn't going to move on until I had understood it. And it became kind of a slog. I was trudging through this book. And I realized I don't think that's what he intended when he wrote it. He writes very prettily. Prettily? No, that can't be right. He writes in a way that's very affectionate about science and the world and time and physics. And it can be very pretty. And I got to this section where he was saying that everything we experience, and in fact we ourselves, are not things, we are events. On a long enough timeline, you see everything happen and then stop happening. So it's not... We think everything is a thing that you can see and you can touch, so it's a thing. But really, it's a collection of atoms doing a thing. And one day they'll stop doing that thing relatively soon if you zoom out far enough. And he says, the difference between things and events is that things persist in time. Events have a limited duration. A stone is a prototypical thing. We can ask ourselves where it will be tomorrow. Conversely, a kiss is an event. It makes no sense to ask where the kiss will be tomorrow. The world is made up of networks of kisses, not of stones. And that's a good example of how he writes about it. So I was thinking, well, physically, scientifically, factually, we and everything around us that we know is not being, it is becoming constantly. And I know your philosophy as a person is going to be a lot different than the science as it pertains to the universe in all documented time, past and future. But it did get me thinking about the idea that, like, maybe even philosophically, we shouldn't be settled on picking one or the other, being or becoming. Because in a lot of ways, you should be becoming always. You should be learning and experiencing and taking stuff on and letting stuff go. I think even as a musician, you're always becoming. There's a new piece of gear or a new thing you learn or a new thing you hear, or your taste just inexplicably kind of changes one day and you don't really like that thing anymore, and you do really like this new thing, and maybe someday you like them both, and maybe someday you won't like either one of them. And it's this constant evolution of you as a musician. And that's how it works as people too. Coming up on 15 years, I hope I've become a better husband. And coming up on just having celebrated 12 years, I hope I've become a better dad. And I hope I keep doing that. And I think what I was feeling when I listened back to the live record is that I have become a better bandmate and a better band leader and a better friend, I think, to people that I'm in this weird friendship / working relationship with. At the same time, a lot of what I do, I feel like is just being. You know, one day when I was 10, a switch just flipped and I went, musician. I will be a musician. I am a musician. I just have to figure out how to do it. And that has not changed since then. Other things have come and gone, but musician has never gone away. And I would just get instruments and go, I'll play this instrument. And I never once thought about, I'll learn how to play this instrument. I'll figure something out. It was just, if I just get one, I'll play it. And I've had varying results with that approach. But, you know, even this podcast at its best is me just being me. You know, occasionally people will ask what you want out of life. And the truest answer I've ever been able to come up with is, I want to be Christopher Gold. Like, fully, completely, in a completely interconnected, unfiltered way. I just want to be Christopher Gold. I want to talk about punk rock and physics and folk music and philosophy, and I want to be with my wife and son all the time, and I want to get tattoos on my neck and play pretty finger-picked love songs, and you know, I just want to do what I do. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that's just being. That's just, you know. And the more I've thought about it in the past couple of weeks, the more I realize it sounds kind of convoluted, but maybe the trick is to always be being the thing you're becoming. And it's funny to me because I've spent, like I said, weeks talking about it, and I'm trying to talk about it now, and I've been thinking about it a lot. And it was all sparked by these two things that are completely unconnected, you know. But that's kind of what I've been thinking about. Like, let yourself change and become what you're going to become, and never think that you're going to stop becoming. But always make sure that you are authentically being whatever you happen to be in that moment. And if that's different than what you were supposed to be 5 minutes ago, that's fine, you know. I think one of the problems we have politically is that the worst politicians aren't doing either thing. They're not being or becoming. On the right, I see politicians that refuse to become. They refuse to hear something and learn something and go, okay, I understand that, and my position has changed. And you probably see some of that on the left, but I think it's more of a signature of the right. And on the left, I think a lot of times the problem is that you don't see anybody being. You know, we're well past the 100-day mark of the Biden administration, and these kids are still in cages. And I have all this outrage about it because politicians on the left told me to be outraged. They explained the situation to me and they said, we're outraged. Aren't you outraged? And I went, hell yeah. And then 100-something days goes by, and now the situation, well, it's complicated. You know, it's a tricky thing. And you know what's not complicated? Forgive me for being up on the soapbox. It's not complicated. It's about emphasis. A lot of people were upset that Donald Trump put kids in cages, instead of being upset that Donald Trump put kids in cages. You understand? So now that you take the Trump out, it's like it's not a problem anymore. And I understand it's still an improvement, because I think, if I may speak plainly, my belief is that Donald Trump thrived on that kind of stuff, and it was part of how he got through to people in a really dark, awful way. And I do think that it matters that at least now our president acknowledges it as a problem and a situation that we need to deal with. But when's the last time you heard someone mention it on your Facebook feed? You know? And to those kids and to those parents, it does not matter why you're in a cage, who put you in a cage, if it's a cage or a holding cell or a fenced-in area, any of that stuff. I don't view that situation as a Democrat or a liberal, and I don't have a lot of patience for people that view it as a conservative or a Republican. I view it as a human being, and I view it as a parent, and I view it as someone who has been a child, and it's wrong. And I think the left struggles with being. We said we think this, we must think it always. We said this is the standard, this is the moral, this is the ethic. It must be that way always. We must be willing to challenge ourselves and our side and all this kind of stuff. And I know it's unrelated, and it's not really what I want this podcast to be about. But it's what's been on my mind, you know, as I think about what I want to do and who I want to be. I can't help but think about what I would like the world to do and be. And then I can't help but think about what's in the way of that. And what's in the way of that is, and you can't speak for other people, but I can tell you this with certainty. I have encountered very few politicians, if any, that I can rightly think are asking themselves the kind of questions I ask myself, that I can rightly think are holding themselves to the standard that I hold myself. And you wonder why we've tolerated this for so long. I don't know. Again, not what I want this podcast to be about, but definitely something I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I know there's smarter people than me that could have a lot to say about this and could probably correct me on some misguided notions, but the fact remains, my view of it is that good people function differently than most politicians I've encountered. But mostly I wanted to talk to you about being and becoming and how we should always be doing both, which seems contradictory. And that's one of the fun things about thought and philosophy, that like, it's one of the great things about not being a politician. What I think does not have to make sense. It does not have to be consistent. It does not have to be provable. But I think I can explain it in a way that people go, oh, maybe, yeah. In the meantime, moving away from my unplanned political rant, I've also been working on new instrumental music, kind of out of nowhere. Over the weekend, I wrote, now I think it might be 6 or 7 instrumental things and got them recorded. And now I'm in the process of adding a bunch of stuff to them. When I write an instrumental thing, it's usually just on a guitar or very often on a bass. And then I'll just record that main thing and then dress it up with all kinds of other guitars and keyboards and drums and things like that. And that's been really fun to work on too. And I was thinking that I would like to play a new instrumental thing for everyone on the podcast today. And then I thought, oh, but you have the live record out, so you should really play something from the live record to encourage people to go check it out and hopefully even buy the live record. And then I thought, don't do that. Like, even if it is a good idea, I'm not here to act on my best idea, I don't think. I'm not here to make the smartest decision for my career. I feel like I'm here to be honest with people. And honestly, what's really exciting me about music in this moment right now is these instrumental songs I've been writing. So I thought I would play you kind of a shortened version of one. It'll just be like a minute or two. And it's so neat, like, it doesn't have a title. It doesn't have anything, but when I play it, I can hear the way I've been feeling lately in all of its contemplative, sad, joyous chaos. So here's a song that'll be on a record someday, probably this year. And it goes like this for now. That was fun. Feel a little jittery. I had too much coffee today. Speaking of, I hope this was good for everybody. I didn't go into it with much of a plan, and it took a couple turns I didn't quite expect. But that's fun to do sometimes, and you guys have been very supportive of how weird this can get sometimes, and I want it to get weird, because being honest is weird sometimes. And speaking of support, thank you. Some more people reached out last week and chipped in to keep the podcast going, and said some very nice stuff, and I really appreciate it. It's good. I dig it. I like what's going on. So thank you guys very much. Let's get you some music to listen to. First up, this band is called The National. This record is called Trouble Will Find Me. The National are a very big band. Likely you have heard of them. The National are notable for me, though, speaking of being and becoming. When I first heard this band, I did not like it at all. Part of it was because it was a little bit different than what I was used to. But part of it was because the phase I was at in my life as a fan of music and a maker of music was such that I didn't listen to bands like The National. Brr. And that was me obsessed with being. I had decided to be this thing, this kind of person who likes this kind of music and not that kind of music, and blah. And as I allowed myself to open up and branch out and become whatever I was going to become, I revisited this band, and I love them. They're so good. They're hard to describe. I guess they're like an indie rock band. I hear a lot of kind of 80s post-punk stuff in it. Like if you listen to a song like Don't Swallow the Cap or Graceless, it's good stuff. Check it out. You might like it. You might not. I don't care. It's okay to not like stuff too. It's not going to hurt you. Just check it out. Up next, this band is called Ha Ha Tonka. This record is called Heart-Shaped Mountain. I've liked this band for a long time. They're like an indie rock band with a little bit of a folk sensibility, but they're not a folk band, which I find really interesting. When there's a notable thread of something running through a thing, but the thing is not defined by the thread, but the thread stays noticeable, you know. This is their latest record, their most recent one. It's still fairly, I think it's like 3 or 4 years old. Yeah, 2017. But this record has kind of a clarity to it that I really like, and I find very reminiscent of like Full Moon Fever era Tom Petty. And there's a lot of 12-string acoustic guitars and that kind of thing, and really good harmonies. Listen to the song Everything. It's just a happy little song, and I dig it. Beyond that, that's about it for now. My guys are getting vaccinated. They're all at various stages in the process, but that means we're going to be in a room together soon, having rehearsals. There are some outdoor shows on the books that we'll talk more about later. I have a live record out. I'm working on another instrumental record, and soon I'll be back in the studio finishing up my long-lost 2020 album that I'm still very excited about. That's it. I'm going to go switch to decaf. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you're just letting yourself be, and I hope you're letting yourself change, and you know, it's about fluidity, I think, and holding on loosely, which I've referenced before. Damn that song for taking a powerful thing and making it feel kind of funny. It's a good song though, I guess, you know? There's no getting around that either. Yeah, let's not draw this out. I'm going to miss you guys, and I'll see you next week. Be good. Talk to you soon. Bye.